It's Chad,
It's Khalil.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. All right. So, in our last episode, we're getting to the point of describing the challenge of finding a balance between peace and freedom. And so, as we do that, we're going to be kind of describing how civilization developed. Because, as we talked about in our last episode, civilization came out of the idea that humans naturally are free, that when we evolved or became different from the other beings on this planet, we had the freedom to do whatever we please, and we have the idea to do things which are good or bad. Good, bad, decided by, of course, societies, commonalities, but we have the ability to do whatever we so please. And so we had an absolute freedom to do that. And as time progressed, humans decided that, that wasn't exactly the best thing. Because if you were you had a farm or you had a piece of land or you had a family, you did not want other people's to take that from you or to steal your food or to pillage throughout the rest of your neighborhood. That was something that humans didn't want. And so we came up with the idea of civilizations who would have people who would rule over them, leaders, and then governments of different people who would lead over different things. Um, and with that, one of the quotes that we ended out our last series with was one by St. Augustine, who lived in the Roman Empire as it was becoming more Christianized, who said that the role of the state, the role of government, was to rein in um, our original nature that has came out of original sin, which we kind of described at the end of being um, should you believe the Christian in the Christian context, the event of eating from the tree of good and evil at the Garden of Eden, in which Adam and Eve ate from a tree that God warned them not to, and then gained the knowledge of what was right and what was wrong. And so we have the idea of original sin. But in the quote we last talked about, St. Augustine saw that since that time, since original sin, we need something to rein in the bad things that humans can do, to rein in the evil, the chaotic nature. We need something that can, like I said, minimize the bad, maximize the good. And the quote ended with, "Our fallen nature needs regulation." And with that, we're going to continue on with another quote that goes along with this idea of humans need something to rein in ourselves, because if left unrestricted, we could cause incredible chaos, disorder, hurt many different people if we didn't stop ourselves. And so we have another quote from Ryan, who wrote the book. Ryan, what was his last name again?
It's Alan Ryan, actually.
Alan Ryan, right? Who wrote the book on politics, who we're using as a very big source for this series and these documents. And so, in his book on politics, he was describing the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, who we'll get to really go in depth about later in the series. But we have a quote kind of describing that idea. Begin with that. In the absence of government, with its attendant apparatus of law and law enforcement, we cannot help behaving badly because we are terrified of being robbed, assaulted, or murdered by other people. Where there is no government and no law enforcement, we are rationally tempted to make a preemptive strike and to attack them before they can attack us, the knowledge of which increases their fear of us and makes it more likely that they will attack us preemptively. That is Hobbes. Absent original sin, which we described earlier, this vicious cycle is broken by the institution of government. We shall not be afraid of others if we know that they are afraid of the law, and they will not fear us when they know that we too are afraid of the law. We are a threat to one another because we fear one another. When that fear is removed, we can become peaceful and cooperative creatures. And what you get with this whole quote right here is the idea of having a supreme order, in this case law, and the ability of people to enforce that law. This is something that could rein us humans in, us naturally chaotic and naturally destructive peoples, and make it so that we can be cooperative, we can work with each other, we could build things that help other people, we could solve global hunger, climate change, we could do all these things when we have a system or a government or a supreme order, such as the law, that all people theoretically should follow, that could rein in this natural chaos. To go back to the quote by Augustine, our fallen nature that needs to be regulated can be done so by this government or this law.
Exactly. We must be afraid slash terrified of something to maintain control. Like when someone, like let's say you're 5, and you say, and your parents say to you, if you eat goo gobs of candy, then you'll get a spanking, or that you will get your whatever device you may have at 5 years old taken away from you.
Or your teeth are going
Or
to rot out.
exactly, like if
Something
there
bad's
is
going to happen if you don't do this.
if there is an idea of consequence, of punishment, that may not even need to be um, if there's an idea of punishment that is inherent in maintaining order, it's because we have that natural tendency to go crazy. While someone might have the thought of robbing you, assaulting you, or murdering you, as Ryan describes, um, it doesn't mean that they'll actually do it because they know the consequences of law. We have the fear of taking terrible action, and so and because of the law, it's a very effective way. And you can think about law again in a broader idea. Think about really what law is. It is using our sin of self-awareness, that original sin that all humans have, um, for our own benefit. You know, it is moving beyond the idea that we naturally want to fight each other, and manipulating, redistributing that original sin mentality of like thinking about things and um what am I saying? It's redistributing, our original sin self-awareness away from I want to really hurt that person to the equal awareness of what's going to happen if they were to actually go through with that deed.
Yeah.
It's a weaponizing our um our worst tendencies.
Essentially using fear as a way to stop us from doing bad things, which when you look at it might not be that bad, because if it keeps us from robbing, from killing, from assaulting, from terrorizing, bombing, all that kind of stuff, then it does have a benefit if it works, of course. But to just go back to the point, we always needed something to be afraid of, whether that was retaliation by the other person or an assured retaliation against us, and that's where law comes in. If you were to rob someone or, break into their house, steal a TV, they might come back at you, they might shoot you, they might beat you up as you try to run out the house. They might not. Maybe they're not there. But the idea of this supreme idea of law, if you rob that person's house, you could be almost assured that the law will catch up to you, that the police will find you, they'll find that TV, and you'll go to jail for a certain amount of time. That's assured. You have that idea that something will happen to you if you do this bad thing, assuredly, or at least very close to assuredly if you do that. So therefore, you won't do it. I mean, I don't want to go to jail. I might like your TV, Khalil, but I'm not going to go steal it because I don't want to go to jail. And so that's a way to create order. And as we said, it's a rejection of our natural tendencies to do bad things, but it's also a rejection of our natural tendency to be absolutely free and do whatever things, because that keeps us, as he said, while it keeps us from the bad, it might also keep us from the good. It might stop us from going over to another country and giving a certain person money, which they might give to, an organization, to homeless people or something like that. Maybe that's illegal because a corporation or something doesn't, agree with that. But law and government in order is still a rejection to a certain extent of freedom. It's a rejection that we could be absolutely free. It holds us back. Law is basically the number one tool of civilization to hold back any sort of freedom that, no, any sort of absolute freedom that we have. We still have freedom, but just limited. And it's that tool that we have used for ages since we've evolved to think about doing it, to be way more specific to where we are now, you know, to the point where you can't buy certain things. You have to buy water. That's a way of order as opposed to just going to a lake. Yeah.
Right. Again, law is the number one tool of civilization. In fact, it does even more than that. It justifies civilization. It proves that we need some sort of governing factor to keep us in line. As I described, civilization and really what it means, because of each one of these concepts, we don't want us to just take for granted, oh, civilization, it's just a word, it's just something that we use in our everyday vocabulary to describe, our modern day society, something that some people want to get rid of, like anarchists and communists, and we have to really look back and understand why they were created and really what they are, and law, it is the number one tool of civilization. It justifies civilization because it holds us back from doing bad things and promotes doing good things. It's essentially teaching us to do good. Because if there's a part of us, that original sin, human motivation to do bad things, to constantly fight and to constantly like come up with some sort of conflict. And the tools and the purpose of civilization is to rein in that violent instinct. Then law is the number one tool to get this done. Because it's teaching us to do good. It's again manipulating that part of ourselves that always wants to go into a fight because we know exactly what's going to happen to us if we go ahead and do it. It's essentially it's a surplus motivation, you know, um, we have a surplus motivation towards theft and violence, and law just holds that in entirely, and that's why it's a great danger to society, the people that do not care about the law.
hmm You got no fear that nothing will happen for you. What's going to stop you? What's going to stop you from robbing a big store, beating someone up, stealing a car? Why not? Oh, someone might go after me. I don't know. Don't believe it. But back again, law is that tool that will keep us in order because we believe and we know that something will happen to us if we break it. Like I said, if I was to break into someone's house and steal their TV, I'm probably not going to get away with it unless I spend years of studying and the time is right, this, that, and the other. The law is there. The law will catch up with you. You will get punished. And it's always fascinating in that we as humans need fear to keep us from doing things that we know are bad. We have the capability to know what's right from wrong. That's what the original sin was eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have the ability to know that what we want to do, what we're going to do, is bad. And yet sometimes we still do it anyways. And the law is basically a weaponization of that, is that while you may want to do it, you can do it. Something bad's going to happen to you then. And it's an interesting way that like society is kept ordered. And when we were researching it and thinking about it, I recalled that in one of the previous series we talked about the idea of nuclear deterrence and the reason that countries, United States, Russia, China, have nuclear weapons is to stop other countries from fighting against them, starting world wars and leading to wars that could end all the planet, is because of that. A war that uses nuclear weapons can kill millions, if not billions, of people. So that's going to stop us from starting a war that's going to kill millions, if not billions, of people. Fear, once again. And so nuclear deterrence is like the furthest extent of what law and what order we have made for ourselves to keep us from doing these bad things is that in some cases it takes the ability to make our entire, most if not our entire species extinct to stop us from doing something that we know is bad, and that's war. And so that was an interesting connection that we made when we were looking at this series.
Right. Um, so to trying to think of a good transition, but basically the idea of law as we've described it, a few times now by this point, you guys probably get it by now, is to rein back our harsh, violent tendencies, number one tool of civilization. And that goes for the regular individual. And now I just thought of my number one best um, transition for this next point here is that goes for the regular person, but what about a king? Kings, they're supposed to be just. They are supposed to be God's icons. They aren't supposed to go against the law because they are the law. They're supposed
They
to be
make it.
perfect. They're yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they
supposed
make the
to be
law,
perfect.
or if not, they just get it straight from God. So why
Exactly.
the king?
That was the way how it was interpreted. That was the justification, the purpose, as it was described for over 1,000 years and long before that. During the medieval era in Europe, as is um very very common to describe and explain and pull from as an example. In the Western world, um, and another example, that we're going to use, for at least for the next few minutes, is the example of Charles II. Now, people may not hear about him, may not have heard about him, but if you know anything about the English Civil War, and how like the long 17th century in England, which brought about finally the Bill of Rights, you know, um, they asked the question with Charles II because you had a Catholic in a majority Protestant England. You had a king because he was absolute, um, putting forth, I believe, as the story went, it was putting forth anti-Protestant legislation, or bringing or giving rights or supreme like authority or rights over to Catholics within the country, whoever was still a Catholic and remained within the country. And this inflamed, the people, you know, um, and then later, I believe, and I have to double check and make sure that this is all true, um, is that he even, worked against the state, working with outside powers, to um, to to fight back the parliamentary regime, which in the Civil War he was fighting against, because they rejected the idea of a Catholic, and even in his authority, um, working against the majority Catholic population, Protestant population. And so um, it was very clear in the end, based off of the story, which I'll admit the details of are kind of lost on me, um, that he committed treason against the English state, essentially. Um, that was the moral of the story, that he committed treason against the English state, and he needed to be punished. But how can you break the law if you are the law? And that was the question that needed to be answered in his trial after he was finally apprehended after a 7 year long English Civil War from 1642 to 1649. And as Ryan put it, quote, the fortunes of the royal and parliamentarian sides ebbed and flowed during the war, and the parliamentarians emerged victorious in 16, I got the date wrong, 47. After Charles escaped captivity and tried to recover his throne, he was definitively defeated, tried for treason, and executed on January 30th, 1649. To many royalists, this was martyrdom, the blasphemous murder of the Lord's anointed. Hobbes concluded that the royalist game was up, and that sensible people must take their peace with the government of Oliver Cromwell. It was then that Hobbes wrote Leviathan, which many readers today read as a defense of absolute monarchy, but which was a defense not of monarchy, but of absolute authority in whatever person or persons it was vested. Hobbes certainly thought that monarchy was the best form of government. but he did not think that it was possible to demonstrate it. What he thought he had demonstrated was that political authority must be absolute. The moral of Leviathan was that subjects had a duty to obey and assist the regime that would guarantee peace and allow them to prosper by their own efforts. End quote. So you can see like some of the details I might have gotten wrong, but with the quote there, you get enough context. Is that the king, committed treason against the state by working with a foreign power to dethrone the legitimate authority um, of um, of the state. That the parliamentarians won at the end of the Civil War. But Hobbes, he as much as he was against the parliamentarians and he was pro royal for much of the Civil War, and he protested the execution of Charles II at the end of his trial in 1649, he eventually came around to the idea that Cromwell and his parliamentarians, um, they needed to be accepted wholly by the people. And there was a very interesting reason for this. It was because he supported not even necessarily absolute monarchy, but absolute authority, because he needed to maintain the peace. Sorry, that was a very long description, but you get the point.
Yeah. What you have described here, again, is the idea that regimes, states, governments are created to create a sense of order, create a sense of peace within a civilization. As we described, the natural state of man was is freedom, self-awareness to do whatever they so please. And as humans developed, they saw this as something that needed to be reined in, to be restricted, because if we let these bad tendencies go on, we would simply just be fighting and end up killing ourselves for all of time. And so, as governments were formed, it was seen that what was most to Hobbes, to Thomas Hobbes, which, as we said, we'll talk about, of course, later in the series as well. But to Thomas Hobbes, what was most important was that that state ensured that order was kept, peace was assured, and that if the government did, if a state, if a government, if a leader did that, then they're all fine and dandy. Whoever's in that seat doesn't matter. What's important is that whatever regime is in power is given that power by the people, that they are kept in check, that their houses are safe from robbers or from war, as long as whoever's in charge makes sure that that civilization is in peace. That's the most important thing to Hobbes.
Right. It was really the idea of absolute authority to the peacekeeping, absolute loyalty to the peacekeeping authority. you know, and once that peacekeeping authority had failed to keep the peace, and it doesn't mean that, like the leader or the leaders of a state, had failed to stop a war from breaking out. That's not the conditions upon which Hobbes would loose himself of that loyalty to the previous authority. It was if, let's say, in this war they lost, they they then or let's say the enemy had overrun the territory upon which the person in question lived in. Let's say that their territory got taken over by an enemy, and that enemy then eventually won the war, the said war. If they were able to defeat the peacekeeping authority, there's no point in resistance if you really care about peace. And that was Hobbes's idea. It's really the broader takeaway that you could get from his Leviathan piece. One that I'll admit I actually misunderstood up until the point when I read this section of the book. I thought it was simply about like loving absolute monarchy. I didn't know it was really just about keeping the peace.
Yeah, as we explained, it's the subscription to the idea that whatever government is in place, it's all fine as long as they keep the peace. That's the most important thing. And that's, as I said, civilization was created to do, was to create an order amongst the chaos. And now that we have a way to kind of bring that to the personal level or make different laws that protect other people from war or robbery or intellectual property, what's important is that that government ensures that that order and peace is secured. And that's kind of taking the idea of civilization and just going continuously going that what you need is that absolute order, that absolute peace, because the free ways of man will only lead to chaos, but the assured power of an absolute authority will keep us in check, will keep us on the way that humanity ought to be, which I'm sure is something that Hobbes would have said if he was here today.
Right. And after the death of Hobbes and his contemporary that disagreed with him on many points, John Locke, um, during the time when a lot of these ideas came, we already referred to Rousseau, we referred to Locke just now, and we'll continue to refer to him, and then we'll also refer to Locke in a more broad interpretation that Ryan gives us in his book. Um, these are all Enlightenment thinkers. This is at a time in European history in where philosophers were given, for the first time in a really long time, the freedom to really think about, you know, like why things happen. That's why it was during this time that the scientific revolution came through. Before then, the idea of science and rationality, if it conflicted with the idea that the Catholic Church was peddling at the time, if it conflicted with a certain understanding of religion, then it was going to be wiped out in its entirety. But it was during the Enlightenment and where those ideas were allowed to prosper, and that's where we get a lot of these modern ideas. Um, I'm just deciding whether or not I could use these quotes. Oh, yes. And with the Enlightenment, with John Locke, there is this idea of the Constitution, and that's what the Bill of Rights really was one of the first examples of. There was the Magna Carta back in the 13th century, 1215, but the Bill of Rights was an accomplishment of the Enlightenment, because, as Ryan puts it, quote, government possesses authority only within constitutional bounds. If it exceeds those bounds, it is declared war on its citizens, and they may resist. Not only may they resist, they have every right to reconstitute the government as they choose to secure constitutional government in future, end quote. So that's very different from Hobbes. Like it doesn't really matter to him if the government persecutes him, as long as they don't kill him, or they bring about conflict within, or lose a fight with an opposition, with a foe, you know. But with Locke, he agrees very much with this understanding that Ryan gives of his analysis of what was probably a Locke philosophy, the
Yeah,
the idea of the Constitution, to stop the government from intruding on its civilians.
yeah. I could see it as you could call it realistic in that it acknowledges that a government will be just as imperfect as its citizens, that make it will do unlawful things, it will do evil things, just as the people that it seeks to control will do. And so what we have with Locke trying to do is making sure that that government, when it is unlawful, when it breaks the rules that the people or the government has itself has set for itself, that it needs to be reprimanded, that it needs to be removed or erased, and in its place one created that is better for the people who established that government. And just going back again to the idea of civilization, this is the idea that we progressed, again, naturally free beings into ones that can control ourselves and create institutions that can keep us in check, that can keep us in order. And so with that, we have the debate over how much should these governments that we give the power to rule over us, how much power should they have? How much how much should they seek to just keep the peace, keep the order within the society? Or should we make sure that that government, um, gives us some freedom to do or express or to act or to believe however we want to do? Is that what we want this government or this civilization to stand for? Or, as we said, do we want it to just be there to keep the peace, to keep the order, and to keep us natural human beings from being our natural selves? And that's something that's going to lead to bad. That's where we get to with this distinction. This is where we're getting at in the 16, 17, 1800s, where we as humans are deciding amongst ourselves as we create whole new systems such as, liberalism, socialism, communism, fascism in the 19th, 20th centuries. As we create these ideas, we're trying to figure out how much do we want this government to, rein in our natural tendencies, or how much do we want them to let us express ourselves or do what we want to do? These ideas are being taken seriously and being used to create, as we said, whole new systems out of the old order of kings and queens and feudal systems. Um, with liberalism, as we'll come to describe, it's a big departure from that idea of a single sovereign leader leading over everyone to many different people having power. And so you have the question of how far can those people go in leading over everyone else? Should they go that far? Should they even have that power? That's where we really get to in seeing how much they can do this, how much they can balance this problem of peace and freedom.
Right. Which is why in the next episode, that should be 3 days ago, 3 days from now for you guys. Um, we're going to be talking about, as Chad explained, the progression of freedom. We're going to move away from what we've been talking about, with the well, actually, we're not really going to move away too much. We did talk about, humanity began with ultimate freedom, and then we talked about, um, a lot of what we talked about, the idea of kings, absolute loyalty. And now we're going to talk about, um, the the progression, through society of freedom. And of course, some nations they gave freedom a lot faster than others did. Other regions of the world gave freedom a lot faster than others did. So we wanted to look a little more broadly, at least as broad as we can, with like the area around, I don't know, like North Africa, the Middle East, Europe, because it's really hard to look broadly around the whole world at the progression of freedom because some societies didn't value it as much as others, but that's what we're really going to get into. We're going to talk about religious toleration. We're going to talk about slavery. We're going to talk about serfdom. We're going to talk about, free market, minimum wages, pensions, accumulation of private wealth, etc. Like all different types of social reforms, that was progressed, as time has gone on throughout society, from ancient Greece, um, where a lot of our understanding of like freedom and philosophy comes from, to the modern day, and
Yeah,
just how much we value freedom.
exactly. We're seeing how we again grapple with the question of, do we want these governments to just control us, or do we want to have a little say in our lives and regain a little bit of that freedom that we were born with and freedom that we so value to even keep today. Um, and yeah, so with that, we are the Marshals of Truth. We'll see you in the next episode. Comes out in a couple days.